It looks like we have a new Texas Speaker of the House, and we'll take a look back at the 2018 midterms. Capitol Coffee Talk is next.
They need to be held accountable.
Good afternoon, everybody. Judy Maggio with Decibel
like
KLRU. My
Your
phone.
phone's on.
This is why I never try to share live.
All right, we're good now. Hi.
Hi.
Who are you again?
Ben Philpott, fresh off the coverage of Ted Cruz and
Yes.
the midterm elections.
Judy Maggio, fresh off the coverage of awards,
I
apparently.
don't know how our Emmy got here. Gosh, it just kind of popped up on the desk. So I just want to brag on my team. The Decibel team won an Emmy for our special on Vietnam, and we were awarded it on Veterans Day, even better. So we're pretty proud
Well,
of
we're
that.
all very happy that you finally have an Emmy. You're
I
like
know.
the Susan Lucci
I
of
am the Susan
television
Lucci
Emmys.
of TV, of regional TV Emmys. I waited 37 years for this, so we're gonna.
It's pretty nice.
I'm coveting it.
You know what? I didn't realize. Not actually chocolate. I always thought. Who knows?
Really?
Yeah,
Mhm.
No.
You
Okay.
thought it was gold-covered chocolate.
Gold-covered
Oh, I'm
chocolate.
not going to eat it. Okay, we're going to take a deep dive today on the midterm elections and
Yeah.
some of the big takeaways. So you want to start there, and then we'll move on to the legislature and all the stuff going
sure,
on there?
sure.
Okay, so you were at the Cruz election headquarters in Houston.
Yep.
That must have been an interesting night at the beginning because Beto had a good little lead going at the beginning.
Yeah, it was really, I mean, I've been telling people that essentially Congressman O'Rourke had the longest lead that we have seen a Democrat have in Texas since I've been here. I can't remember a race that stayed this close for this long, except possibly in 2002, John Sharp versus Lieutenant Governor, then Land Commissioner David Dewhurst.
David Dewhurst, yeah.
For the Lieutenant Governor's race in 2002.
Forgotten about that. Was a close one.
I think that one went down to the wire, drug on a few hours into the evening. But we had that on Tuesday with this Senate race. In fact, when the early votes came in, if you look down the list from the Secretary of State's website, Democrats were winning in almost all the statewide elections.
Is that because the urban areas came out so heavily for early voting?
I think it's because a lot of people were doing straight ticket, straight party voting. So if you did vote for Beto, then of course it would also show up as a vote further down the ballot for Justin Nelson, or the other people that were running for statewide races.
Office.
Nelson was the Attorney General candidate. But also, yes, I mean, the urban counties with their digital voting systems, their electronic voting booths that they have, were able to collect early voting, put out early voting, collect votes, put out their votes from Election Day more quickly. And that's what you saw. You saw Democrats, especially Congressman O'Rourke, with leads, and then as the rural areas came in, the lead shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and then flipped, and then it grew and grew.
And he only lost by about 220,000 votes,
Yep.
I heard. So what does this mean statewide? I mean, this was a rock star candidate with lots of money from both in-state and out of state. Do you think it changed the face of the entire election as far as how Democrats did, or are Democrats really trending now? I mean, were we really turning purple in Texas?
Well, I think it certainly appears that the trend is moving towards this state being more competitive. And what we saw on election night was because of help from a close race at the top with Congressman O'Rourke losing by just a couple 100,000 votes, that helped candidates down the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much all the urban, suburban counties within Texas went for Democrats, went for Congressman O'Rourke specifically in his race against Senator Cruz. That includes places that we haven't seen blue in quite a while, like Tarrant County, places like Williamson County, Hayes County here in Central Texas.
I think a lot of people were surprised going back to Williamson County. They went for both Beto and MJ Hager. I mean, they went for a lot of blue candidates in Williamson County. We've always considered that a red county.
Hager came very close to winning her race against Congressman Carter because of that. And also, 2 Republican state house seats in Williamson County flipped to Democrats. One in Hayes County
Is that
flipped.
the Workman seat?
No, the Travis County one was Workman.
Okay.
There was one Republican left in the Travis County State House delegation, Paul Workman. He did lose to Vicki Goodwin. But then in Hayes County again, you had a retiring lawmaker, Jason Isaac, for the State House. He had retired to run for Congress, wasn't successful there. But the Democrat won that race. So all through Central Texas now, you just have these these Democratic State House members, which was part of, and I guess that's for everyone who was hoping that it would be Senator O'Rourke defeating Ted Cruz on Election Day, but didn't get that. The one good bit of news one of the good bits of news for Democrats is that they flipped 12 seats in the Texas House, and they flipped 2 state Senate seats.
And the courts, they made gains in the courts,
And they made
right?
gains in the courts.
So, so we can say that Texas is a little more blue.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you, a lot of people will say, well, no, look at the map. There's all this red and then these little pockets of blue. Well, the little pockets of blue have as much population.
I was
as
going to
all
say
the
that's
red.
where all the people
Yeah.
are on those blue pockets.
Right. So, if you look at the map in terms of, again, this is a state that just had a major vote with millions of dollars and pretty high turnout.
Really high for
considering
a
a
midterm. I think it was the highest since like 1970 or something for a midterm.
And highest percentage, yeah. And the race was decided by a couple 100,000 votes.
Well, it made it exciting to watch, quite frankly, on election night because statewide races have been so lopsided in other elections. So this one was like, oh, there's actually something to watch.
And if you really enjoyed endless hours of political television commercials and people coming and knocking on your door and asking if you're registered and if you know where your voting location is, then you're going to love 2020. Because not only will we again have congressional races, all the people who won this last week will be up again in 2 years. And I would assume Democrats would try to run people again in every single district. But you've got a presidential election.
Right.
And depending on who the candidates are and how other states are looking, if Democrats thought that Texas could vote for a Democrat for president, they would pour millions and millions and millions of dollars into the state because of the Electoral College gains that you would get winning the state of Texas.
And the Latino vote, we talked a lot about that ahead of time because this was something that everybody was really courting because the Latino vote is important. It's the fastest growing group in our state. Lots of young people becoming voting age who are Latino. And it did seem like a lot more young Latino voters did go to the polls this time. And that could change the face of
absolutely.
the
And
Democrats versus Republicans in
our
Texas.
Ashley Lopez did a story on that actually ran this morning on KUT, and you can find it on KUT.org. And talking about the idea of the largest, I'm forgetting the exact number, it was something like the largest number or largest percentage of increase within the Hispanic community was
young voters,
voters.
Like 18 to 34-year-olds.
And of course, 18 to 34-year-olds. Well, if you're the 18 to 36-year-olds, you'll still be around in that demographic 2 years from now when we have a presidential election. And so it's or 32-year-olds. So it's this state is becoming much more in play. At the same time, this was a midterm. We'll see if
there will
see
be
what
a
turnout's going to be.
There's always a big
Right.
coattail effect when it's a presidential election. Do you have any overall takeaways? I know women won about 40% of the races they were in, and that was a big change this time around, is that so many more females ran.
And I think nationally, and
women.
I'm not going to remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I think nationally you saw in terms of Democrats who won office, a very large number of them being female. On the Republican side, I think I read somewhere that Republicans in the U.S. House were down to extremely low numbers in terms of women that were representing the party. So it's this was an election where you had a lot of excitement and anger among some women voters, and that turned into deciding to run for office and campaigning. And
It started with the march, and then a lot of people just said, "Oh well, I can make a lot bigger impact if I run for office."
And it's quite clear that that energy carried through at least in a lot of these races. Even in close races like MJ Hager, where she didn't win, but what was leading throughout most of the night. And I'm really interested in seeing how many of these close but didn't quite win end up running again 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Like, will MJ Hager move on to something else, which she certainly could.
Absolutely.
I assume
Very
she will
talented
get
young woman.
dozens of different offers to work with different groups. Or will she focus that on saying, I think 2 years from now I can win it?
And what about Beto? Everybody's talking about
Beto?
what's next for Beto in 2020. I want to move on to some local races, and we have invited, and she graciously accepted, Syeda Hasan, who covers local politics, among many other things at KUT. Thanks so much for joining us. And you did notice that I gave you the Superwoman.
I did.
The Wonder Woman. The Wonder Woman mug.
Which I need that Wonder Woman energy to keep me going, because we had an especially long ballot in Austin
Yes,
with
we did.
lots of council.
All
that
those
just
propositions.
Exactly. We had 7 bonds on the ballot, as well as several different local propositions. So a lot for voters to comb through.
And $925 million in bonds, and they all passed, right?
That's right. All 7 of the bonds, that $925 million bond package passed. I think perhaps the most notable was Proposition A, which was a $250 million bond for affordable housing. There was also money for flood mitigation, transportation infrastructure, parks, libraries, really a host
Health
of
center in
pools.
Dump Springs, pools.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, the health center in Dump Springs is a big one.
So I know that you cover affordability. Do you think this money in the Prop A is going to make a dent? Do you think that it will be a positive thing and a noticeable thing in the community?
Well, I think that it seems to really be tackling affordability from a lot of different angles, and it really does seem to touch on projects and ideas that city leaders and different advocacy groups around town have really been pushing for. There's money for things like repairing existing affordable housing, and also I think one of the biggest initiatives that I often hear folks talk about at City Hall is the need for the city to buy land right now for affordable housing down the line.
Like Habitat for Humanity is going to be able to buy, I guess, more land?
Sure. So the city would essentially be using a share of this money to be buying up land that they could sort of hold on to, and buy it at the price right now, so that it doesn't get, even more expensive 5 or 10 years down the line, and eventually use that to build new affordable housing on.
So there were some propositions that several people were confused about. J and K.
Yes.
One dealing with the zoning issues.
And these were the 2 that got no votes.
And one dealing with the audit. Is that right?
Right. So Proposition J and K were really interesting. These were both the propositions that came about from citizen-led petitions, and both of them failed. So Proposition J came about as a result, after the now defunct Code Next process, which was an effort to rewrite Austin's land development code, which I often say in a nutshell, it's the rules that govern what can be built in Austin and where it can go.
That's a great way to say it, because it's a confusing issue.
It is. It's really all-encompassing. And so Proposition J called for any comprehensive rewrites of those rules to be put to a vote, and there would also be a waiting time before, say that change passed, there would be a waiting time before it could go into effect. And so that measure failed. So comprehensive land code rewrites will not be put on the ballot. And then Proposition K was the other one that stemmed from a citizen petition, which called for a third party to come in and do an audit of the entire city government's operations and finances. And there was an interesting debate around that issue, because Austin already has its own internal city auditing department, and there were some folks that were calling for, sort of this outside entity to come in and do it as a push for more transparency, while others argued that, we don't really need this.
And it would cost a lot of money, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the actual city council and the mayor. So Mayor Adler won without a runoff, got a decent chunk of the vote, was it 60% or? Anyway.
Something like that,
yeah.
let's say.
A large portion.
A large portion.
Enough to win.
Without a runoff
Without
with
a
Laura Morrison, who a lot of people consider her a formidable challenger, former city council members, very popular with neighborhood associations. Is this a mandate for kind of Adler's agenda, do you think? What's going to happen now, do you think, of the city, since he did win without a runoff?
Well, I think that it's interesting, because I think that Adler and Morrison, I did hear from a lot of folks, even just at some of the forums we hosted, that they held similar positions in a lot of areas, but I think that the thing that sort of defined their difference was their stance on processes like Code Next, the future of Austin's land code.
Development.
Exactly, the future of that going forward. And so Mayor Adler did say after election night and after we saw Proposition J fail that he really wants to get the ball rolling, doesn't want to have any more delays when it comes to this process of rewriting Austin's land development code. So I think that folks who are looking for some changes there did see this as a win.
Council races. Let's discuss that.
It was a split decision. We got some done with.
Yeah,
right.
Tovo and Kitchen, I guess.
Yes, so Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Tovo, who represents District 9, did win re-election, as well as Councilmember Ann Kitchen, who represents District 5.
And he was unopposed. Right?
Yes, Councilmember Kitchen ran unopposed, but there are 3 more city council races that are actually now headed to a runoff. So those will be really interesting races.
And you and I were talking about this earlier. There's a little nugget in each of those 3 races that makes them interesting.
I love the Renteria Susanna Almanza race because I covered that at the original time, and now the brother sister. Let's talk about that race.
Exactly. So District 3 has been represented by Councilmember Pio Renteria, and this is a district that covers much of East Austin. And so he was seeking re-election, and he will now be heading to a runoff against his sister, Susanna Almanza. And Almanza previously challenged him in the 2014 race, which I believe went to a runoff as well in 2014. And so we're sort of seeing history repeat itself when it comes
Wouldn't
to this
you
race.
like to be at Thanksgiving dinner at that house?
we kind of were at the District 3 forum that we did because she would very often. It's funny though; she wouldn't quite mention his name. I don't think.
But she mentioned it a couple of times, but
she was probably the most critical of the people up on the stage for that race.
Right.
Well, she's a longtime activist, and I guess they do have different followings. But I think some of these races are going to come down to the December 11th. Runoff. Okay, let's talk about the other 2.
That's
though.
right. So the next one that we should talk about is District 1. This is another East Austin race where the incumbent council member, Ora Houston, did not seek re-election. So this race was wide open, and it's now heading to a runoff between Natasha Harper Madison and Mariana Salazar. And that was an especially tight race. I think Salazar got something like 26% of the vote, whereas Natasha Harper Madison got just around 25%. So it was a really tight race between these 2 candidates.
And Vincent Harding was the 3rd candidate, and a lot of people thought he would make the runoff, but he didn't in the end. So.
Right. He was the one. He was Travis County chair of the Democratic Party, and people felt that his connections through being a party leader would help him out here. But yeah, go to a runoff. And I find this district interesting because it is the district that has traditionally. Even kind of the old gentleman's agreement that the city of Austin had. This is where the city got its African American representation from, and still has a chance to do that this time around, but also might not. And just kind of that says something about the changing demographics of Austin.
And the shrinking African American population in our city. I think we're the only major city losing African American population.
Natasha can't win, but. Because who knows? I mean, 7 people may come out and vote on December 11th, which is why runoffs are really
That's why runoffs are so critical.
Right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I was actually at Natasha Harper Madison's watch party on election night, and she mentioned to me just, the fact that she was I believe she said she was the only African American woman in any of the city council races, which really says something about the lack of representation and diversity in those polls.
I think that's absolutely true. And then the final race.
Yes. So the very last race that is headed to a runoff is District 8, which is in Southwest Austin, and the incumbent in that district, Councilmember Ellen Troxclair, did not seek re-election, and Troxclair has kind of come to be known as the lone conservative on the Austin City Council. And so this is an interesting race to watch because, of course, council races are nonpartisan, but the candidate that she did endorse, Frank Ward, is going to be facing off in a runoff against Paige Ellis, who...
It's more progressive, I guess. Yeah.
Right. I believe on her campaign site she actually identifies as a Democrat running for city council. So that'll be an interesting race to watch, whether District 8 remains sort of that conservative holdout on the Austin City Council or whether there's maybe a change in leadership there.
And this is, of course, the district, part of that district was in Paul Workman's district, who
Lost.
did not win, Republican Paul Workman, who did not win re-election. Again, though, it doesn't really matter because now we're in a runoff, and how many people come out and which constituencies come out. The Travis County GOP could really make sure that every single voter that they have on their rolls in District 8 comes out, and then you might see an unexpected win there for
It's
Ward.
always a numbers game, and
Yeah.
I think the runoffs are so hard to predict.
Right. And I think one of the points we should note, because sometimes it gets confusing with all these races, is that, only folks who live in that council district can vote in these races,
Exactly.
whereas, for the Austin mayor, anybody who lives in the city can vote. But these will really come down to the folks who live in
So those
specific
parts
districts.
of town will have that on their runoff ballot.
Exactly.
And that is, again?
So District 1 in East Austin, District 3 in East Austin, and District 8 in Southwest
On
Austin.
December 11th.
On December 11th.
And
And
early voting.
there will be a week of early voting before?
Starts
Is that-
November 29th. November
Okay.
29th through December 7th. So
Oh, that's,
I think
Okay.
that's what I read.
okay, yeah. Sure.
Don't quote me on
I'll
that.
go
but
with
that's-
that.
Okay, sounds good to me.
You got an Emmy. You
After
must be
37
telling the
years.
truth.
Syeda, thank you for filling us in on the latest on the city elections and the runoffs coming up. We didn't talk about the Texas legislature because on January 8th, it all starts again.
Yeah.
Tell us about Dennis Bonnen. Is that his name? From the Angleton?
Dennis Bonnen. He's been in the legislature. He got elected in 1996. Been there.
Oh, he's been there a long time.
This is going to be his, if I'm remembering correctly, his 12th term in office. He's been the Speaker Pro Tem, which is essentially the number two underneath Speaker Strauss for at least the last two legislative sessions, if I'm remembering correctly. And he was also, or is currently, I guess, until the new session starts, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. That's the committee that deals with tax bills.
The important stuff, the money.
Really, the money. That's right. They're the ones that pass things to whether we cut or add revenue to the state. He's a close Strauss ally. Speaker Strauss, who's been speaker for a decade, decided not to run for re-election, so he'll be turning over the gavel to whoever the House decides to vote for as new speaker on the first day of the session. But he came out yesterday, Monday, and said, "I've got 109 votes." And so there you go. The race is over. He actually said, "I'm here to say the speaker's race is over."
Right?
Everybody's dropped out, and there were some of those 109. Obviously, that includes some Democrats. So even ahead of time, several Democrats had said, "Yes, we're on board with Dennis Bonnen being the next speaker." So he close ally of Strauss, but also his own man, and a very, very kind of this seems like a cliche, but very straight, direct, plain-spoken, kind of guy. Even in the press conference yesterday, he was asked a question by a reporter that he was a little perturbed with, you could tell. And he immediately said, "Well, thanks for asking me that question. Since the last time you put something in an article about this, you didn't even ask me."
Oh.
So he's
There's a lot of transparency there.
yes.
It's a positive spin.
He's
on
not
it.
exactly confrontational, but he's ready to have that
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of confrontation, though, he, as with Speaker Strauss, is not a fan of the Freedom Caucus, which is
The bathroom bill.
the group of
really
about
more
a dozen
hardline conservatives.
not a fan of them, has often had little tiffs with them from the dais and the back mic in the Texas House as they've come up to block bills that are trying to be passed in the House. So it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of forges his own path. I think a lot of people who were looking to Joe Strauss to be that wall against more hardline socially conservative bills that were coming out of the Senate, they will be looking to see, is he going to put up that same, stopping really tough social conservative
Could be a
bills from coming through.
continuation of the Strauss kind
Yep.
of philosophy.
But at the same time, he also, he is, of course, Republicans in the Senate and some Republicans in general like to say that Joe Strauss was a rhino, a Republican in name only. Certainly, Bonnen is not a rhino. He was one of the people shepherding through a bill that would have capped property tax increases year over year and passed it and got it passed through the House. But his cap was higher than what the Senate wanted. So the Senate just essentially killed the bill because the House couldn't pass anything lower than what Bonnen was able to get through. so it'll be really interesting. I mean, every legislative session is interesting, but now we've got new leadership, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Things may be more unpredictable.
Right, new leadership and 12 new Democrats, 2 new in the Senate.
A little bit louder voice for Democrats.
There's even talk of I've seen a couple of articles on how even the Senate may become a little more moderate this time around, even though it's just 2 more Democrats, and they still don't have enough votes to on their own block any legislation that comes through the Senate. Democrats on their own. But they feel like that with some of the more socially explosive bills that have come through, that there may be more appetite to join with the Democrats now that they're so close to be able to block it. But we'll see.
Our final order of business today, so to speak, are bills, because yesterday was the first day you could pre-file bills. So give us some highlights. I know the first one I want to talk about is the bill that would kind of overturn Austin's sick leave ordinance. No surprise there. There's never been a lot of love between the legislature and Austin, Texas.
You know, as we actually talked, I believe we talked to him, you know, Paul Workman was planning on filing that bill.
Right.
He's not in the office anymore, so someone else has filed it. First thing to say is, you know, a little caveat with all of this, only about 20% of all bills filed even pass. So the fact that they were filed on the first day doesn't make them any more likely. But when you only have a few hundred bills to look through, some things jump out a little more quickly than when you have several thousand to look through. And yeah, so the paid sick leave, the line from Speaker Strauss on bills like this has been, this bill is in litigation, this bill is in the courts, this law is in the courts rather. Why should we get involved before the courts have even decided? So you might see Speaker Bonin take the same tack of, you know, why would we waste the House's time when the courts might say that the city of Austin or any city isn't allowed to do it on their own. But you've also seen some bills like there's some medicinal marijuana bills, both from Democrats and Republicans. And remember, both the Democratic Party platform and the Republican Party platform have language on reducing criminal penalties.
Decriminalizing marijuana in a way,
and of course, Democrats would like to see possibly, although you had one Republican last time file a bill on like some medicinal marijuana stuff, but it, you know, I don't know that Texas is ready to go as far as California or Colorado or Oregon.
But it's becoming more prevalent across the country, the legalization of marijuana.
There's also, of course, we've had, I think there are 2 bills, I'll just rattle off real quickly, that I think show how Texas lawmakers are thinking about changes at the national level. One is there are at least 2 as of yesterday, maybe more by now, bills that would ban abortion or restrict abortion greater than we already have here in Texas. That is, you know, those are bills meant to head to the courts, to head up to the Supreme Court, where anti-abortion activists believe, now that we have Judge Kavanaugh in place, that court would rule to overturn Roe v. Wade and therefore end abortion in the country.
Probably a similar bill in just about every state right now.
Yes, absolutely. Because again, they're hoping, they want to get sued, they want to get into the courts, and they want to go up to the Supreme Court. And the other one is now that Democrats have taken control of the U.S. House, there is a bill that would punish counties for enforcing or creating gun regulations, gun restrictions that follow federal restrictions.
Ah, okay, I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, so it's I'm not, you know, not having gone to law school, I don't know what the legalities of that are, because I think that federal law can regulate some gun stuff. So, but this law would take away, if passed, would take away state grants from counties that enforce federal gun laws. And that, of course, is with the belief that the Democrats in Congress would pass gun restrictions. Of course, I think we can all agree that the Senate probably won't, and that the president wouldn't sign it now.
No.
But bills like that are out there too.
Okay, so the final bill I want to talk about before we say goodbye is every year they file daylight savings time bill.
Yeah.
Right? And every year it fails. Every 2 years it fails during the legislature.
You know, it's funny. I mean, I have no idea what the appetite or temperature is to pass something like that this time around, but it does seem like over the last, 4 to 6 years, states throughout the country have been pushing this more and talking about this
It's
more.
confusing to always have to set
Well,
your clocks forward and back, and it
The
messes
most
up your
the most confusing time is when Arizona doesn't have daylight savings time when the rest of us do, and so for a 6-month period they're actually on Pacific time like California instead of Mountain time.
Well, all I know is no matter what time zone you're in, it's been Philpott's birthday,
Oh, that's right.
which should really be a national holiday.
I second
Or at
that.
least a state, or at least a state
Excited,
one, maybe a
idea.
local one.
A local holiday, okay. But happy
Mayor
birthday.
Adler, where's my declaration of
Yeah,
Ben
where's your
Philpott
day? Ben Philpott Day in Austin, Texas. Maybe you'll get that for your 50th. It has to be a monumental birthday.
That'd be nice. Well, in terms of, we had John Ailey when he had his 50th year on the air at KUT. We did get a declaration from the city council. I don't think I'm going to make it to 50 years on KUT, even if I wanted to. But
That's only 3 years away.
No. He's been on the air for 50 years, not his 50th birthday.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, he has been
I
broadcasting.
thought you meant 3 years from now when you turn 50. Because I'm now giving
No,
away your
I
age.
believe I'll make that.
Okay, good. I was a little worried about that.
Folks,
okay,
I'm fine. I'm doing fine.
We're going to start lobbying Mayor Adler to make it on your 50th birthday, Ben Philpott Day in Austin, Texas.
I would.
He will be in office.
I'd be pleased if he'd work on affordable housing and not worry about me.
Okay, all right. Syeda Hasan, Ben Philpott from KUT, thanks so much for sharing your insight with us today. And thank you for sharing a little bit of your lunch hour with us. We'll be here every Tuesday at 12:30. Go out and make it a great day. Stay warm out there.